The age of industrialization. How did the concept of industrialization develop? What are the different stages that gave chance for the development? And how did the modernization occurred? And how did the people accept the change of the past to the modernization? But before going into the details of understanding industrialization, we would now look at the picture which was drawn by E.T. Paul around 1900 year, means the 20th century starting. In his magazine, a music album, the front page, he gave a title called The Dawn of New Century. In his title, The Dawn of New Century, we can see a lady. She is standing on the wheels which are having wings, and behind her we have the railway tracks, the modern big buildings, and all these things, the improvisation of the technology. So, on this image, the artist Mr. E.T. Paul want to give the message that we are looking towards a modernization age for which the wings have started in this period, where she is representing the modernization from the past to the modernization. Most of the new inventions like machines, machine work has increased, and later we have the railway network getting increased, the modern large vessels, the modern big buildings, all these things, the international trade, international marketing, all these are being represented very clearly on the image of the dawn of new century. And you looking at the image 2. In the image 2, we have Alauddin's lamp, where it can showcase that building a beautiful palace which is symbolizing the past. The modern, the railway network has been shown, where the modern mechanical technology is giving a scope for the development of the large scale understandings of industries, factories, transportation, housing, cities. All these things are shown in the picture, while Alauddin was shown as a representative of the past, modernization has shown as a representative of the modern era of that time. So in this way, we have different shapes, different modules, different images showing this one. So actually, what is modernization, or how can we study the history of modernization? The history of modernization is the history of industrialization or modernization is nothing but it is the history of development. Or sometimes it would be called as the story of development. The history of development or the story of development. All these things can be understood very clearly. How did the industrialization happen? How did the modernization come? This all can be understood very clearly by understanding the story of development. Where is the story of development? Is it in the industries? No, it is in the story of development of machinery coming into the everyday life of a person, especially to the human beings. How did the machines got a special significant places in the human being's life? All these things can be understood only when we study and analyze how did the machinery enter into progression. How did the progress of the machines happen day by day. So all these things we can understand by step. So we need to break the story into parts and understand it very clearly. Then only we can get an idea of how did the age of industrialization come in Great Britain. Then it passed on to all the other parts of East as well as to the West. Now, generally we get used to the words like industrialization. Whenever we talk about the word industrialization, we generally associate industrialization word with the factorization. Whenever we talk about the industrial workers, we get the word like factory workers. Whenever we talk about the period of industrialization, we think or we are discussing about the concept of establishment of factories. But actually, many of the historians have expressed a view that factories were there far earlier, before the industrialization happened, which means like before the industrialization progress or the so-called modern period have started, before also we had the proto-industrial period, that is called proto-industrialization. Proto-industrial period, which means before to the industries we had the proto-industrialization, the period when the industrialization was not in full progress. Also we had many number of industries known as proto-industrial period. But do they exist in the same parameters and in the same system of management as it is in existence in today, either in the industries or in the factories? No, it was in a different style. How did the earlier factories, or how was the system developed, and what are the reasons for not developing in the cities and developing in the towns? That is, we have in the cities powerful trade guilds, trade unions. These unions are given special powers by the rulers to have monopoly over the particular business what they do. For example, if you talk about the cloth businessmen people, cloth business merchants do not have much scope and rights to do any business in the city, because the entire authority of monopoly is being given on the workers and on the union by the ruler to a particular group of people. So these people need to find out some other alternative to do their work done. So these people used to move to the nearby towns where there are no trade guilds, where there are no trade unions, and there is no concept of powerful issues getting involved in this work. So when merchant wants some employees, he would like to search them in the nearby towns of the city where he lives. So this made the merchants to find their ways to the towns. And let us look at the situations at the towns or at the villages. When we talk about the situations at the towns and nearby the villages, where the cultivation day by day is coming down, the poor peasants need to work like gathering of the firewood, berries, gathering of the berries, vegetables, and also hay. Like that, the original capability of the cultivation has come down because of the lack of wealth with the peasants, and also the unfavorable conditions like the lack of the rains in the proper time also made the cultivation to become a mere disaster or a failure. And also the tiny plots which are owned by the peasants cannot be cultivating so much what the family needs for them to run their entire business or the family incomes. So all these reasons made the people, those who are living in the towns and in the nearby villages, to search for a new alternatives or jobs. So when the situations were worse this side, and when the merchants need some people to work for them at very less cost and also far away from the city, so the need of the merchant, the necessity of the peasants made them to come together. So the merchants used to come to the nearby towns, identify the people, and allot works for them by dividing the entire work into different categories. So once the entire work is divided by the merchant who does business with the cloth is called merchant clothier. The merchant clothier gives the entire resources for them, like wool to the wool stapler. He collects the wool from the wool stapler, then he sends it to the spinner. The spinner will spin it, then afterwards it is sent to the weaver. After from weaver it is sent to the fuller, who settles everything and makes it very clear, and then for coloring finally to the dyer. So all these stages, every merchant clothier used to have 50 to 100 workers working under him and different categories, and then finally gets the work done. And after the work is done by the workers at different places of the towns, then finally it was taken to London for doing the final packing and then exported to the other countries. This London is also known as finishing station, from where the product goes out of the nation. So before this entire process happened also, before we have the factories, before we have the industries, we have the merchant system, the putting out system, the system which helps the people to come together and do work. And if you look at the peasant's point of view, the peasant's perspective here, working for the merchant is that merchants need workers, merchants need people to work far away from the towns, cities especially. But the people, those who own tiny lands, they could not leave their home villages and move on to the nearby place because it may be occupied by somebody or something else may happen, and they cannot afford to lose their small tiny plot lands. But at the same time, if you work for the merchant, it would be an additional income for them, and that income would also help them to recover from the loss which was incurred for them by the unconditional rains or the natural effects. So that's how the proto-industrial period was also in existence before the actual industrialization started in Europe. Let us look into the coming up of the factories. As in the previous part of the lesson, we have discussed that how is the factory set up and how do we differentiate before the period of factorization and after the modern period of industrialization. As I told you just now, what are the factors that supported the merchants to do their trade out of the cities, and what are the unfavorable conditions for the merchants to not set up any of their units within the limits of the cities, as we all know that a strong monopoly of the trade unions or the trade guilds was present within the city limits permitted by the ruler of that time. So there is no other alternative for the merchants, and the situations which are not in favor of the peasants also made them to get connected with the required merchants, who thought that by working for the merchant as an additional income which would suffice their regular requirements, and also can work in their tiny plots so that they can get their field in their hands, and also the work from the merchant would add on their income and the entire family can participate, what we called it as proto-industrialization period. Now let us move on. How did first mill got set up or the factory got set up in Great Britain? The first mill which came up or the factory which came up was in around 1730s. The most common product which has seen the rapid globalization of the Britain was cotton. The two important things of Great Britain's rapid industrialization, one is cotton, the other one are metals. These two products made Great Britain's name as a very unpredictable, long-natured experience, because cotton has been exported to every corner of the world. So that's how the people around the world came to know about Great Britain. Now let's move on to the statistics. In 1760, the production of cotton was around some 2.5 million pounds. The income which the UK government was getting from the cotton production was 2.5 million pounds. Though in 1730s, the cotton industries or cotton factories were established, only by 18th century ending only they can find more number of factories available because of the various other reasons. But from 1716 to 1787, the production on the cotton has been increased nearly 11 times. That is 22 million pounds was been the income for what UK has been getting from the cotton. And with the improvement of efficacy, the improvement in the production of carding system, in the twisting system, and also in the spinning, and finally in the rolling, which increased the production of the entire cotton on a very larger scale and to meet the requirements of the international market. So the efficacy is a combination of carding, twisting, spinning and rolling, which four are the important necessary activities which have to be done in order to get cotton into your hand. And then when we move on to the other major development which changed the entire outlook of cotton in the world, Richard Arkwright. This man invented the cotton mill. Richard Arkwright's invention of cotton mill made the entire system to tremble during that time. What are the reasons for trembling of the entire institution during that time? The institution got trembled because till that time, as we discussed earlier, merchants moved to the place where the peasants are willing to work from their home. He used to supply the entire raw material to the nearby to the house place where people used to work from their household work along sufficing their income. They would work for the merchant and also work within their fields. But after the discovery of Richard Arkwright's cotton mill, the work from the household got transformed into the place called mill where the factories are being set up. Then the entire work earlier where the wool has been bought from the person who sells the wool, then again from there to the spinner, and then from there to the fuller, and from there finally after passing through various stages it is sent to the final stage of the dyeing stage at London, where rightly London is also known as finishing place. So before the work was done in a split process which is known as putting out system, but now everything was brought under a particular point where the mill is located. So every work, whoever want to work for the factory or the particular mill have to come and work at that particular place. This is called getting the entire work under one roof. So after you got the entire work under one roof, slowly, though the cotton mill machine was costly, people started to see more and more number of cotton mills, factories getting up, set up newly in the UK region. If you look at the map, you can see a beautiful landscape of mills getting up added day by day. It was a tremendous growth in the infrastructure as well as in the production of the cotton. Now we shall look at the pace of industrial change. How rapidly did the industrial change occur? Generally we have an opinion that the industrial change has occurred very fast, very rapidly. But let us go into the details to find out the answer for this. Did the industrial progress or the pace of industrialization took place very fast or very slow? What was the thought of the historians in regards to this one? What did they identify finally? That's what we are going to find out in this particular concept of pace of industrial change in 1.2. So the first one what we can see is that the dynamic industries of Great Britain are cotton, steel and iron. Initially up to 1840s, the cotton was a main production point and main exporting point for Britain and earning huge amount for the Britain government. But later after 1840s to 1860s, the expansion of steel and iron has made the position of the cotton, but the number one position in the imports and exports has went on to steel and iron products in only Great Britain. In 1860s, if you take the production when it compared to cotton, 77 billion pounds of income has been procured by imports of steel and iron. Whereas if it compared to cotton, it was almost more than double. And the next major changes what we can see is that first one, we have seen the change of the basic cotton to iron and steel industry, where it has almost doubled the income in respective to the cotton crop. The next one is a new traditional one. The 19th century ending also, you could not find more number of industries taking up the initiative to set up the modern machinery, because 20% of them only were able to set up even by the end of 18th century, 19th century starting, because most of the workforce were not willing to move to the cities most of them want to be in the towns, and the machinery was very costly, and also to setting up of these things we need a lot of people to come together. So only 20% of the workforce was kept or employed under the industries, the second major factor. And the third one what we are going to discuss is the traditional industries, like the non-steam and the non-metal industries got little bit reduced. For example, cotton, where cotton production was initially very high in Britain, but as the time passed on, the place of cotton was taken away by iron and steel. In the same way, the non-steam metals or the non-metal industries started to grow, but not very fast. At the same time, they were not at all in a reserved mood. They were non-stagnant. At the same time, they were not very active. They were in the middle path. As time passed on, the non-mechanized, the non-machine used industries started to develop day to day. The non-mechanized industries categories are the food processing industry, the building sector, the pottery sector, the glasswork sector, the tanning, and then the furniture. So these all industries started to grow day by day and without the use of the machinery on very larger scale. And the next major change is the technological change. The technological change was also very slow during this period in Britain. Generally, we have an opinion that in Britain, any technological aspect gets its boom very fast. But in actual practice, it is not in that way. The technological change was really very slow. Machine repair, if in case the machinery got spoiled, it is very costly even to repair the machines. So this also could be one of the reasons why the momentum of technological change could not get so much fast, well connected to the people. James Watt, the person who modernized the machine which was discovered by Newcomen to make it a steam engine in 1781. Matthew Boughton, the friend of James Watt, started to make the machinery, though it was modified and for very less cost. Up to a very long period of years, he could not find any one person willing to buy the machinery. Later on, overall, he could able to be sell only 321 machinery, out of which 80 were used for making cotton, while 9 were used for making wool, and rest were used for mining and cultivation and canals and all these things. So the first point is that the dynamic industries of Great Britain, cotton place was taken over by steel and iron industry. Up to 1840s, cotton was the dominant one, but later on iron and steel industry has taken over the position, and the import income what the Britain was getting till that time got doubled for nearly 77 billion pounds. It was not a very small amount, and that was nearly more than 2 times of the cotton's income. And one more observation which was made by the historians was that the new traditional methods, there was a gap between the new invention and the traditional methods. Though many of the cities could not adapt themselves to the new technology, but they have given scope for the traditional industries to survive for a long period. Even in the 19th century ending, only 20% of the industries are willing to have a separate factory unit, while the rest started to get most of the work done in the nearby towns and in the villages. And the third major aspect is the traditional industries started to grow up, where they were non-steam and non-metal industries, and it is non-stagnant one. Cotton started to grow up, though it was not in a very boom to its actual nature, but still it is active. And the non-mechanized industries which got it developed during this period are the food processing industry, the building industry, the pottery industry, the glasswork industry, the tanning industry, and the furniture works. All these started to grow their grounds in the UK lands. And finally, moving on to the major aspect, technological changes adoption levels are very slow even in the industrialization nation or the country which is considered as more developed today. Also during the initial stages they also had the understanding very slow. Mechanical repairs of any of the machine was really very costly. That also made them to understand, let's not move on to the technological advancements, let us stay away from them. And James Watt, who modified the machine made by Newcomen in 1781, where the friend of James Watt, Matthew Boulton, has set up an industry to manufacture the machinery. It was very difficult for Matthew to find a person. So James Watt's modification of the industry, the machinery which was made by Newcomen in 1781, and then Matthew Boulton, who was ready, agreed and started to manufacture the modified steam engine, which is going to give the increase in the production of the machinery to 4-fold times or 5-fold times by reduction of the cost. Just you need to buy the machinery to get the work done. But still it was very difficult for Matthew Boulton to find a person who is willing to buy the machinery. Overall, by 1781 to 18th century, he could find around some 321 machines in and around of Britain, out of which 80 are used in cotton and 9 in the wool, while rest are used for mining, cultivation, canals and all these things. So finally, from the historian's point of view, we can say that the traditional craftsmanship or craft person or statesmanship has its glory during this period, and it is not the machinery that is important for the people during that time. It is the craftsmanship and the statesmanship that was given high priority during this period of time. Now we shall move our focus of attention on how can we compare the situations of hand labor versus the steam power. How did the hand power, people's power, got replaced with the machinery power? As we discussed or highlighted the points in the previous chapter, that the point of interestedness towards the machinery was very low, which was analyzed by the historians in the previous chapter. They gave more importance for crafted, skilled persons and not for the machinery, though the machinery has brought in down the number of the employed to a very low level, but most of the industrialist people did not show much interest to go for the mechanization rather than going to employ more number of people. And now, as the situations changed, the agriculture proved to be a disaster because of the lack of the rains, lack of the infrastructure problem like the canal, water, all these things proved agriculture to come down in the production, which resulted the people to move out in search of jobs. So during this time in Britain, in America and in Australia, there was no shortage of human hands available for them to hire for their industries, because thousands of people moved from villages to the towns and from towns to the cities. The cities were overwhelmed with the population of the people coming daily into the city. Now the industrialist people, factory workers, owners decided not to go for upgrading of the machinery, but let us hire people according to their requirements and finish the work done with a very low possible cost. Because if you want to buy machinery, you need to put investment in lakhs of rupees. Instead of that, you can hire people seasonally and make lot amount of work with very less amount of investment on that. So with this ideology, they went ahead and there was no shortage of human labor for them, and during this time there was no proper employment opportunities also for the people who moved on from villages to cities. So there were many seasonal works available for them, like the gas works, breweries, bookbinding, catering during the season of Christmas, and also hand labor products. So the one more reason why the industrialist or the factory employee owners like to have more number of skilled workers rather than machines is that the people in Great Britain, like the aristocrat group or the bourgeois group, would love to have the products which are made by the human hands. Those are considered as the finest one according to them. So they produce nearly 500 types of hammers and 45 types of axes which are made by the human hands. So the machines were not used during that time to produce the antique pieces. So you may get a fundamental doubt. Then does they really do not use machines at all? I just mentioned very clearly the aristocrat group and the bourgeoisie were having a fashion or interest to have handmade goods, but not for the other categories of people. So only to fulfill the needs of the aristocrats and the other group who are interested to have the handmade goods, those people were encouraged with the 500 types of hammers and 45 types of axes, while the machines are used to produce uniform works like clothing or anything which is required for the abroad market for them. They used to export all the machinery products to other countries to earn more profits. And let us move on to the category of handmade goods to the other things now. How is the situation of the worker during this period of time? The worker's life was very critical and crucial during this period of time. As we discussed just now, the cities were overwhelmed and tramped with the overpopulation which is moving on or migrating into the city. As the cities got the migration of the people in very large number, providing accommodation for them also is a very difficult task. So the cities, the people finding a job has also become a tough task for them. If you want to get a job in any of the factories, you need to have your friend or your kin working in the factory who can identify you and mention you to the particular person who is in charge of the factory. Then it would be very easy for you to get a job inside. In case if you don't have any relative or any friend working there, then it may take weeks or months for you to get into the industry. And when the people are not having any jobs, there is no possibility of taking any kind of houses for rent or staying in a good location. And during that time, many thousands of people used to sleep in the gardens, where outside of the houses, on the streets, in the night. So there was no other place for them to stay. So these are some of the miserable conditions which are experienced by the workers during that time. So if you have your friend or your relative, it would be very easy for you to find a job in the company. And the work was also in the factories is only seasonal. Seasonal work means you have a work for a specific period of time only. Afterwards, you do not have that particular work under your name, because the necessity or the demand for the product comes down during that period. As we discussed before, we have the seasonal works available. Gas and the breweries work are available during the time of winter season. Repairing of the ships was also done during the time of winter, because in winter the entire water gets stagnant because of the extreme cold climatic conditions in Britain. So they would like to prefer do more number of repair works or the pending works during that period, because of the less vessel activity into the ocean during that time. And then we also have bulk of orders coming for Christmas to make the cakes, as it is a festive season for them. They need more number of hands during that period. So like that, basing on the season, basing on the requirement, the people used to get their jobs. And coming to the topic of wages increase, though the wages are increased in the early part of the 19th century, but later on we don't find any other possibility where the wages were increased to the workers who are working in the factories. It was very difficult for the workers to find their increase in the wages. Though it is increased also, it is in very less number, because there is no stable timeline for them to work. Seasonal works are more, and during the Napoleon Wars time, the products cost used to go up, so the income whatever they are getting could not suffice that one, and nearly 10% of the people in Britain were completely in the cities, are not having any work to survive. And the dissatisfaction of unemployment status, the number of people unemployed went on from 35% to 75% during this period. And also the competition of new technology and to the hands, as we were discussing about the main theme of the concept, that is spinning jenny, which was introduced during that period, and women who started to work with the jennies had in a tough competition during that period, because the spinning jenny is a machine, whereas women used to contribute their 100% efforts to make it. It has been an issue of controversy also for a very long period of time, and by 1840s, after, the availability of the work has increased more because of rapid colonization. The building has been increased, the roads are started to be constructed, the railway network has to be expanded. So in order to fulfill all these things, the government, the work to be done, people those who are unemployed were being deployed here. So all people started to find their jobs very soon, and in the next very few months to an year, the work requirement got doubled, and by another 30 years again it got again doubled. So that's how the need or the necessity of the work has been increased by the end of the 19th century. So now let's have a brief recap of what is the hand labor and steam power. There was no shortage of hand or human labor during the initial periods of the 18th century and the ending of the 18th century, because the first phase of the 19th century were witnessing the failure of the agriculture. Most of the people from the villages started to move to the cities in search of some job in order to survive, in order to have a piece of bread. So that situations made very good favor for the merchants of America, merchants of Britain, and also the factory owners of Britain and America, which provided there is no at all possibility to get the workers at very less wage earlier. But as the workers are coming in a triumph towards them, as huge number are coming to the cities, they would find very easy for them to employ at very less wages. And also the work was seasonal. There are different categories of seasonal works, like the gas work, the breweries, the book binding, the catering, all these things emerging during the time of the Christmas. And there was a passion for the people in UK, especially the groups like aristocrats and the burghers. They would like to prefer more of the handmade goods. That was also one of the reasons why the Americans as well as the Great Britishers are preferring to have more number of skilled people rather than going for upgradation of their mills or factories with the latest machinery, which is really very costly. Instead of that, you can take some few employers or employ some people at very less wages and make them to work very skillfully and sell the product at the double the cost and earn huge profits. That's how they planned very well and executed. The worker's life was really very miserable during this period, and he could not find a job unless and until he have a friend or a kin who is working in the factory or the industry. And the seasonal unemployment means the work will be only for a few months or few days, then the rest of the time he should be unemployed. So the wage increase is a difficult task for them, because finding a wage itself is very difficult during that time, and so the life of the workers was really very miserable. During the Napoleonic Wars, the wage was not increased much. Even though it was increased, the cost of the products also was increasing day to day basis, and 10% of the people in Britain were completely poor and no employment was found for them, and the unemployment status increased from 35% to 75% in the later part of the period. And with that, we can understand by the middle of the 19th century, there was a lot of dissatisfaction among the people. Need or search for the jobs was going up higher and higher. People always used to get scared with the implementation of the new technology, many people will be thrown out of employment. That is the reason why people are very much resistant towards the improvement of the machines into the work of the factories. Anyway, spinning jenny, a machine, was always in controversy with the women's jenny, where it has been a controversial issue for a very long time. By 1840s, the situation started to change and turn up into a new side, because lack of roads, lack of infrastructure, everything need to be fulfilled. So they started to build roads, building activity started, railway network laying work started, and also building the large towers, offices, everything gave a chance and the possibility of the unemployed youth to come and join into these categories of activities and at least get their daily bread without asking anybody. And also in the next 30 years, again the requirement got doubled. So that's what we have in hand labor and the steam power. Now let us see how industrialization developed in the colonies. Here, industrialization developing in the colonies, in the sense industrialization developed in India. So when we discuss about industrialization, again we in the previous part of the lesson has analyzed and understood the different factors and the reasons before the industrialization, proto-industrialization period, then the setting up of the factories, discovery of the new technologies and all these things. So this time our discussion will be limited and restricted only in context to the Indian development, that too specifically on the textile industries. So the Indian textile industries would be the key agenda, and how did the Indian textile industries got emerged out with the help of the industrialization, whether it was favored or it got degraded, that we shall analyze now. So the age of Indian textiles. Indian textiles, Indian fabric, Indian cotton. Indian cotton has been the finest cotton in the world. No other country in the world produces such a fine quality of cotton available in the world market. So Indian cotton has got a special significance and a fine fabric nature when compared to the other fabrics available in the market. So during the ancient period, on the coarser cotton, Indian cotton has been known to the world by different corners, especially from the west and the northwestern boundaries of India trade. The Armenians and the Persians used to take the Indian cotton bales through the northwestern route, crossing the Himalayas and also crossing the deserts for a very long time, and then taking it to the western Arab countries. And also we have a vibrant trade on oceans, especially via Arabian Sea from Gujarat and Surat. And we also have ports at Musolipatnam on the Coromandel coast and Hooghly on the Kolkata belt region. So it's not only from the west, it is from the northwest, and also via to the east we have the spreading of Indian cotton to the other corners of the world, like from the Armenians and the Persians taking from the northwest through the deserts, crossing the Himalayas to the other countries, Gujarat and Surat on the western part, Musolipatnam, Coromandel coast and Hooghly on the eastern part, taking the Indian cotton to the world market. In 1750s, till that time the Indian cotton was the dominant one. Indian traders were the dominant traders to sell their cotton in abroad. But in 1750s, the Europeans started to arrive towards India and started to put their footprints in a very large manner. They initially got many concessions from the local courts, and later on they started to establish monopoly on the trading. So in Surat, prior to the arrival of the English people or the European nationals, the trade account or income was around rupees 16 million rupees, which has been slashed down to 3 million rupees by the end of the 17th century. The drastic fall down of the trade can be noticed here. So with the arrival of the Europeans, the trade started to slash down. That is an important understanding of this point here. And when we move on to the villagers, how did the villagers get affected with the arrival of the Europeans? The villagers got either migrated themselves because the Britishers forced the villagers to pay or to sell the cotton at very less cost. The first point. Then we shall move to the next point. The villagers, they revolted against the Britishers' policy, and sometimes they even opposed the company officials who came to give advances for them or asking to repay back the amount of money or refusing to pay the loan amounts by the villagers. So here we need to understand the logic here is how or why did the villagers started to oppose the actions of the Britishers? What made the villagers to get migrate from their own hometowns to the other places? Why are the villagers getting angry against the company officials? Why are they revolting against them? Why are they refusing to pay the loans to them? So in order to understand this one, the first logic is that the company officials initially started to make a treaties with them or a tie-ups with them, saying that they need this much of requirement, so they will pay certain amount in advance. Once the amount of money is paid in advance for them, that's like a binding the people in order to go and sell their product in the market. Though the product in the market may be costly, but because they are receiving initially advance amount for them in a very low amount, so they have to sell their product to the particular British or the European companies only. So this made the villagers to feel very much depressed and restrained, because the cost of the Indian cotton is very high in abroad, that everybody knew that, and Indians have been part of the trading communities from the very olden times. So they all knew what is the value of cotton of India in abroad. So when they were paid in very less amount, the villagers started to migrate the village, the people started to revolt against them, the village started to oppose them, and sometimes they openly declared that they were not ready to pay any kind of amounts back to the British company officials. Now we shall try to find out the reasons. What are the reasons that made the villagers to become so arrogant towards the officials of the Englishmen? So let us find out the background picture of what happened during that time. So the weavers, why did the weavers react like that? In 1760s, the Indian textile was on great demand. Though the Britishers were in India from 1750s, they did not enter into the textile market during that period. So the Indian product demand was on its peak during that period in the European countries. It is only in 1760s and 1770s the East India Company got established here. And on the wake of the Carnatic and the Bengal wars, the victorious East India Company want to have control on the textiles, because it is finding really very difficult to secure cotton from the Indian land. What is the difficulty for the East India Company? The East India Company is facing a tough competition from the Dutch people, Portuguese people, and also the French competition, wherein when the competition is more, the weaver had an options more to sell them, and finally whoever is bidding for the more amount, that person will be paid back the entire product. So the company officials have written the entire details in a letter back to the company, saying that they are finding it really very difficult to procure cotton and supply it regularly back to the companies in London. So on this information, the company want to gain political control in order to monopolize the trade which is present there. So in order to monopolize the thing, they need political authority to control them. After getting the political authority after the Carnatic and the Bengal wars, the Britishers started to eliminate the traders and the brokers of the cotton. They started to slowly wipe them out from the picture. Later they appointed the Gomastas. These Gomastas have to go to the villagers, weavers especially, and collect the product from them. Loans are being flowed to the weavers. The weavers were expecting some kind of huge appreciation from the Britishers, where Britishers initially gave certain amount as loan for them and forced them not to get in contact with any of the other suppliers or any of the other buyers. So this loan amount would be restricting and binding them to get the product sold only to the British officials or the East India Company officials. So the weavers and Gomatsas were sometimes in quarrel with each other, because Gomatsa also belong to the same village. There may be some personal clashes between them. So after getting the news of this one, the Gomatsas have been transferred from one region to another region, and new Gomatsas were brought from the external region of the village to be the head of the village weavers community to collect from them. And these new Gomatsas used to come with the Sipais along with them and used to force the weavers without listening to any of their problems which are happening for them, because the weavers, they have to dedicate themselves completely, and not only themselves, their family, their children, all should join together in order to complete one assignment which is required for the Britishers. And sometimes they even used to forego their cultivational lands and skip the crop for a season. So this kind of situations and the force made by the new Gomatsas using the Sipais made the villages to react, desert the villages, migrate from the villages, or revolt against the Sipais, or refused to take the loans initially, so that we would not be getting any kind of troubles from the Gomatsas. So that was the basic reason why the villagers revolted, resisted the company officials. The background story of this one. Let's have a quick recap of it. The weavers, why did the weavers react in such a way? The weavers actually in 1760 were in a peak of their success. Indian textiles on great demand in European market. By 1760s and 1770s, East India Company has established their foot in India. After getting victorious in the Bengal and the Carnatic wars, they want to have a regular supply of cotton to the company which is located in Britain. So in order to find the cotton supply regularly for them, it was becoming a very difficult and a impossible task for them, because they are facing a competition from Portuguese, Dutch and the French people, which made it very difficult for them. And this information we got it from the letters written to the company by the company officials. After getting this information, the company officials decided to gain political control first. After gaining the political control, they started to eliminate the traders and the brokers, whoever is dealing with the cotton trade. And after they are eliminated, in place of them, Gomatsas are appointed to take care of collection of the cotton from the weavers. So in order to get weavers in their support or bind the weavers to sell only to the company officials, the Gomatsas, the company is released certain amount of loan to all the weavers and made it binding for them to sell only back to the company officials. And these Gomatsas used to be in quarrel with the villagers, whoever were not giving the cotton in time for them. So when the weavers and Gomatsas were in wars, the new Gomatsas were brought, who were away from the village, new people to the village, and then these new Gomatsas would enter into the village with the Sipais and force the weavers terribly if they could not do the work in time. So these reactions and this force done by the Gomatsas made the villages to desert the villages, migrate from the village, or revolt against the Sipais. Sometimes they even openly refused taking any kind of loan amount from them, because practically it was becoming very hectic and very difficult for the weavers to do the entire work. The entire family should get involved in this one, and they are paid very less when compared to the market price of the product for which they are providing loans for them. Next, How did Manchester come to India?
If you like this video, please give a thumbs up. Please subscribe to our channel to get more videos on CBSE syllabus.